Hello and good evening to you guys. I am sitting at home just trying to figure out what to do because I am, it's a Saturday night and I'm bored. So I'm actually just going to go to the grocery store and I guess run errands because, yeah. So I thought before I do that, I would come on here and address something that I meant to address in one of my other videos that I just did and kind of blew past it altogether. And so wanted to go through it again, along with something else that I think is just fun. So let me find real quick. First of all, I'll say hello and welcome to you guys. I got my new sweatshirt in the mail yesterday. It's for my son, an Army one. Yay, my son. I'm actually going to North Carolina next weekend to see him. He has a long weekend. And so I am going to hop down there for a bit and see my boy. And I purchased his plane ticket so that he can come home for Christmas on leave again. So I'm excited about that. The fig tree. One of the questions that I got when I solicited questions, comments, feedback was, and I'm getting to it right now, so please excuse me, just giving people a minute or two to pop in if they want to be here for the live. But one of the questions that I got, born again for Christ. And I very vaguely touched on this, and then I meant to go back to it, and I completely didn't. So I apologize, but I will now. How do we know that the fig tree is Israel? It seems to be generally accepted that Jesus was referring to Israel becoming a nation again in that parable. And he's talking about the one in Matthew 24, which says the following. After discussion of the events of the 70th week, there are several kind of parable type things that Jesus says. One of them being the following in verse 32 of Matthew 24. Now learn the parable of the fig tree. When his branch is yet tender and putteth forth leaves, you know that summer is nigh. So likewise ye, when ye shall see all these things, know that it is near, even at the door. The perhaps largest stumbling block to kind of understanding what that is talking about is the fact that people generalize the heck out of Matthew 24 instead of leaving it specific as it is intended. And when I say specific, I mean it is 70th week specific. Jesus starts with the seal judgments. He works his way to the midpoint of the week and then the end of the week with after the tribulation of those days with his return. This is literally Daniel 9:27 A, B, and C in all parts that is being discussed in Matthew 24. So in the verse, when it says, now learn the parable of the fig tree, okay, does that represent national Israel? It does. And one of my other subscribers was kind enough to leave some other feedback, but let's finish with this comment first. But it goes to Matthew 24, 32, and 33. So it seems that it seems to be generally accepted. And again, that's a problematic statement because again, that goes to the nature of generalizing Matthew 24 rather than keeping it specific as is intended. So it is generally accepted that Jesus was talking about Israel becoming a nation, but the specific intent of the passage has got nothing to do with that. But before I turn people off by saying that, let me continue. I'll explain. So it seems to be generally accepted that Jesus was referring to Israel becoming a nation, again, in that parable. If so, that gives us a pretty good idea of the timing of future events. Jesus said everything would happen before one generation passed with us, with Israel being 73 now and Moses having defined a generation as 70 to 80 years. Okay, well, first of all, a generation is not defined as 70 to 80 years. In Psalm 90, which was written by Moses, and it was written by Moses between Numbers and Deuteronomy. So it was pre-entry into the promised land that was written. A lifespan he describes as 70 to 80 years. The specific passage in view there, again, Psalm 90:10, which says the following. The days of our years are 70 and 10. Lifespan, not a generation, a lifespan. And if by reason of strength it be 80 years. So it's not 70 to 80, it's 70 or 80. It's not a range. It's the days of our years are this. And if this other situation exists that caused them to be this other number, it's not a range. It's not 70 to 80. It's 70 or 80. The days of our years are 70. Definitive statement. And if by reason of strength they be 80 years, not up to 80, 70 or 80, again, lifespan. Yet is their strength labor or sorrow, for it is soon cut off and we fly away. Now, I'm not saying that there couldn't be a tie to Matthew 24 regarding that, but I'm saying that's not the specific intent of the passage. Does that mean there couldn't be more than one meaning? It doesn't mean that. But then again, is not the specific intent of the passage. So let's continue. It says, with Israel being 73 now and Moses having defined a generation, again, a lifespan as not 70 to 80, but 70 or 80, if this other condition exists, if by reason of strength they be 80. So it is 70, but if this other condition exists that allows for it being 80. So let's be very clear and specific here. Seems there's only a 7-year window left. Well, that's not what is intended. But again, we'll get to that. But I do not understand how we know that Jesus was talking about Israel in this parable. I'd love to hear your explanation or opinions on this. So he is talking specifically about Israel, because who's he talking to in this passage? Well, he's talking about a period of time that applies specifically to Israel. It is the 70th week of Israel, the last week of years, which are determined upon thy people, Israel, and upon thy holy city, Jerusalem. So it would seem reasonable that the fig tree would regard Israel. And thank you to Eric Breckenridge, who says, here are some scriptures on the fig. And I said, my immediate reply was he wasn't talking about Israel in that parable. What I meant when I said that was he wasn't talking about Israel in that parable as regards 1948, as was the specific intent. The fig tree does regard Israel, but it doesn't. The parable isn't talking about Israel becoming a nation in 1948, and that's what I meant when I said, but I said I will discuss. He further said, or Daniel, one of my other subscribers, said, where does Moses define a generation as 70 to 80 years? Well, and that goes back to Psalm 90:10, and again, that's not a generation, it's a lifespan, and it's not 70 to 80, it's 70 or 80. And if the 80 is only if by reason of strength. So it's not a range, it's two possibilities, 70 or 80. He said you can't be talking about the Jubilee cycle because that's 49 to 50 years and they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. So no, it wasn't talking about either one of those. I said he's talking about Psalm 90:10, but that's not a generation, that's a lifespan, and it's not related to Matthew 24. Not directly. And he says Psalm 90 is attributed to Moses' writing. And yes, Moses wrote Psalm 90 in between the end of Numbers and the beginning of Deuteronomy. So if you look at Numbers and Deuteronomy, you'll figure out exactly where they were at, like on the day specific that Moses wrote that. And the 70 is a reference to the number of days left before they actually entered the promised land. You find Deuteronomy written on Shabbat 1, which is 70 days before Nisan 10, and Nisan 10 was when they entered the promised land. So the 70 has got some other things going for it that do not relate specifically to Matthew 24. The number 70 doesn't actually even relate to Matthew 24 at all. The possibility that 80 could is up in the air, and that's like you got to do some fancy footwork to get that to match, and that's even just kind of a guess at this point. So some scriptures on the fig tree. So I will say thank you to Eric, because we'll go over those real quick. How do we know that Matthew 24 is referring to Israel? Well, the parable of the fig tree is talking about Israel specifically, but he's also talking to the Jews in the Olivet Discourse about something that will happen to the Jews in the future, which again is 70th week specific. It's 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and thy holy city. So it is a Israel-centric prophecy that he's giving in Matthew 24. Regards the specific events of the 70th week, which again pertain to the land and the people of Israel. It is the outstanding judgment left for the transgression of their unbelief. But let's go to these passages to just validate the statement that the fig tree does regard Israel. Hosea 9:10. Hosea, Joel, Amos.
Hosea 9:10. And it says, I found Israel like grapes in the wilderness. I saw your fathers as the first ripe in the fig tree at her first time. Yep. So the forefathers of Israel were the first ripe, were the first people in the fig tree. Israel. Yep. Habakkuk 3:17. That's a book you don't see talked about much. Although the fig tree shall not blossom, neither shall fruit be in the vines, the labor of the olive tree or the olive shall fail, the fields shall yield no meat, the flock shall be cut off from the fold, and there shall be no herd in the stalls. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord, I will joy in the God of my salvation. The Lord God is my strength, he will make my feet like hinds' feet, he will make me to walk upon mine high places, to the chief singer on my string instruments. And that's talking about the judgment that Israel will go through and obviously come out the other end after they believe. Jeremiah, Ezekiel. Oh. There we go. There's Jeremiah. Jeremiah 24:1. The Lord showed me, and behold, 2 baskets of figs. I actually wrote about this passage specifically in my book, my second book, The Judgment on the Summer Fruit. Actually, there was a lot of the judgment of the summer fruit was specifically about the figs and where the figs are found in prophecy in the Old Testament and the New Testament to tell us time of year. That was when I started with the what time of year is all of this stuff going to happen, 70th week specific. So I actually referred to this. It made me laugh because it's talking about good figs and naughty figs. The Lord showed me, and behold, 2 baskets of figs were set in the temple of the Lord. After that, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, carried away captive Jeconiah, the son of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, the princes of Judah, etc. One basket had good figs, even like the figs that are first ripe. The other basket had very naughty figs. And I just get the biggest kick out of that. Because like the word naughty is in the Bible, it's not bad. It's naughty. Like you were bad kids. You were naughty. So that made me laugh. Which could not be eaten. They were so bad. That's just, I don't know. Sorry. It's a hilarious verse to me. Then said the Lord unto me, what seest thou, Jeremiah? And I said, figs, the good figs, very good, and the evil, very evil, that cannot be eaten. They were so evil. So that's actually talking about the Babylonian captivity. And then Jeremiah 29. So yeah, naughty figs. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, behold, I will send upon them sword, famine, pestilence, that will make them like vile figs that cannot be eaten. They are so evil. So yes, figs are specifically related to the people of Israel, the fig tree, obviously, which bears the fruit related to the nation of Israel. So the generally accepted principle that this regards Israel is correct. The generally accepted principle that this relates to Israel becoming a nation is false, because this is only got to do with prophecy. It's only got to do with the 70th week specific. Again, he talks about the seal judgments at the beginning of the week, Revelation 6, and he talks about the midpoint of the week, which pertains specifically to Revelation 10, 12, and 13. And then he talks about the second coming, which is Revelation 19, when he talks about immediately after the tribulation of those days. So when you understand the specificity with which this is intended, the 70th week, when you go to the immediate talking about the parable, which follows on the heels of beginning, middle, end of the week. Again, this is Daniel 9:27, A, B, and C. So he says, now learn the parable of the fig tree. When his branch is yet tender and putteth forth leaves, you know that summer is nigh. Okay, so if your summer is your end goal, which it is, because the disciples, what were they asking? Said, tell us, when shall these things be? So the when is the 70th week, beginning, middle, end. The when is the lead up to what they're actually asking about. When shall these things be? 70th week. And what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? So if your summer is your end of the world, the second coming, and that's your goal, that's what you're looking for. Tell us, when are these things going to happen, the 70th week? And they end with, what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? So when you're looking at it through that lens, you want your lead up to this event. When? 70th week. What? Second coming. So learn the parable of the fig tree. When his branch is yet tender? 70th week. The when that they're asking about is 70th week specific. Seals, middle, end. Beginning, middle, end. Daniel 9:27, A, B, and C. So the when the branch is yet tender and put forth leaves, that's your 70th week. When this starts, you know the second coming is coming because there's a countdown to it. That's the what. So the when is the 70th week. The what is the second coming. When shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of the coming and of the end of the world? When the branch is yet tender and putteth forth leaves, when the 70th week starts, you know that summer is nigh. You know that the second coming is on the way. So likewise, when ye shall see all these things, beginning of the week, middle of the week, end of the week, you know that it is nigh, the what, the second coming of Christ, even at the doors. So I appreciate the fact that people speculate about the 70 through 80 range and trying to fit this into how many years could we have left, because Israel became a nation here. So the maximum amount of time that we could have possibly is here to them becoming a nation. No, because this isn't a general prophecy. This is a 70th week specific prophecy. When the 70th week starts, that is what begins the countdown to the second coming of Christ. So the when is the 70th week. The what is the second coming. When ye shall see all these things. What are all these things that he just got done talking about? The events related specifically to the 70th week. So the generation that sees the 70th week begin, and the middle, and the end, is the generation that will see the second coming of Christ. It has got nothing to do with Psalm 90:10. Because the parable of the fig tree, when it putteth forth leaves, you know that summer is nigh. It's not about Israel coming back into the land, because not all of them are going to be gathered. They're not all going to be gathered in the land until after the tribulation of those days. The sun shall be darkened, the moon shall not give her light, the stars shall fall from heaven, the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. Then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man, and all the tribes of the earth shall mourn. They shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. How do we know that this isn't talking about Israel being gathered back into the land in 1948? Because whatever happened at that time up till the second coming of Christ, they're going to be dispersed again. He shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. Clearly, this means that Israel is not going to be in the land at the second coming of Christ, at least not all of them, because the angels are given the specific delegation of authority, the command to go bring them back. And this relates specifically to the fulfillment of the prophecy in Deuteronomy 30:1-4. It shall come to pass, when all these things are come upon thee, the blessing and the curse which I have set before thee, thou shalt call them to mind among all the nations whither the Lord thy God hath driven thee, and shalt return unto the Lord thy God, and shall obey his voice according to all that I command thee this day, thou and thy children with all thine heart and with all thy soul. That then the Lord thy God will turn thy captivity and have compassion upon thee, and will return and gather thee from all the nations whither the Lord thy God hath scattered thee. If any of thine be driven out unto the uttermost parts of heaven, from thence will the Lord thy God gather thee, and from thence will he fetch thee. And the Lord thy God will bring thee into the land which thy fathers possessed, and thou shalt possess it, and he will do thee good and multiply thee above thy fathers. So I appreciate, again, the fact that people think that that's got to do with Psalm 90:10, but that's generalizing something which is meant to be specific. And the specific aspect of that is the 70th week. So the parable of the fig tree is when you see those who are alive to see the beginning of the 70th week are the same ones, the remnant, the elect, that will be brought back to Israel to go into the millennial kingdom. When the 70th week begins, there's a countdown attached to the what, which is the second coming of Christ, the point at which he will finish gathering the elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. Whether they have been scattered, he will bring them back. And that is like what the previous verse before that talks about. Because I think it goes into the parable of the fig tree. Learn the parable of the fig tree. When his branch is yet tender and put forth leaves, you know that summer is nigh. Likewise, when ye shall see all these things, what are all these things? The 70th week. You know that it is near, the what? The second coming and of the end of the world. The signs of the coming of the end of the world. You know that it is near, even at the door. The second coming of Christ. So that is literally a Daniel 9:27 A, B, and C specific chapter. And the Daniel 9:27 A, B leads up to the C, and that's the when. When is the 70th week? The what is the second coming? So if their goal is the what, his return, they want to know when these things are going to happen, the lead up to that. He's talking about the 70th week. So the generation that sees the 70th week is the one that's going to see the return of Christ. That is what that parable is talking about. It's got nothing to do with Psalm 90, and there's no year count associated to that other than the 7 years of the 70th week that is in Daniel's prophecy specifically and in the day counts in the book of Revelation. Other than that, I'm sorry, but that is not what that means. So that's the fig tree comment. So I appreciate Born Again for Christ leaving that, and Daniel Deshawn and Eric Brackenridge chipping in or chiming in with other information with that. So again, as always, I appreciate that. And then the last thing I want to talk about, the other fruit, the pomegranate. This is interesting. And this is just a quick aside. Like, did you know? Did you know what the fruit in the garden is that Eve ate? And this is a testament to the grace of God. To be perfectly honest, this is just another illustration of how hard God tried to make this difficult. How hard he tried to make it difficult for Adam and Eve to disobey him. Let's see, I'm just going to bring up BibleGateway.com, and I'm going to put in the search bar the word pomegranate. For those of you who are unaware, the pomegranate was used to adorn the temple, the curtains and things in the temple. And we learn this from the book of Exodus. Beneath the hem of it, thou shalt make pomegranates of blue, purple, scarlet, the hem thereof, gold bells round. This is Exodus 28, a golden bell and a pomegranate. Exodus 39, bells and pomegranates. That was the fruit. Numbers 13. Let's see. Nope, I think what I am looking for is really just in... Oh, because then you go to 1 Kings, and it's talking about other temple things. 1 Kings 7, 2 Kings 25, and then 2 Chronicles 3, talking about wreaths and pommels and pillars. 2 Chronicles 4. So anyway, in Exodus and in 1 Kings, 2 Kings, and 2 Chronicles, regarding the temple, the tabernacle, you are looking at pomegranates. That is the fruit that adorns the curtains in the temple. Now, what do we know about the pomegranate? It is a fruit that is very difficult to eat from. Like, it's very, very hard to eat. Like, you have to make an effort to get to it. And what you eat in it is the seeds. How many seeds are there in a pomegranate? 613. How many laws are there for Israel? 613. It's interesting because when you go to the book of Romans and chapter 7, Paul says that he wouldn't have known lust unless the law had said, thou shalt not covet. You don't know something is wrong until you're told that it's wrong. And then you make a choice whether or not you want to do it and be wrong or not do it and be right. And this is exactly what happened in the garden when Adam was given a command by God not to eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, for in that day he would surely die. So at that point, Adam was given a law, given a command and said, I can choose to do this and I'll be wrong. I'll knowingly be wrong. Or I can choose not to do this and I will stay in God's good graces. And then Adam gave the command to Eve to not even touch it. Because when you go to Genesis 3, there's an extra command in there that she was passing along what she had heard, probably from her husband telling her, this is what God said, don't eat it. But he told her not to even touch it. So she did take of the fruit and eat of it and gave it to her husband with her. God, well, presumably, being that the pomegranate has the number of seeds that matches the number of laws given to Israel, and that the pomegranate adorns the things in the temple, the curtains, veil, whatever. The pomegranate is actually stitched into those. Conceivably, that would be the fruit that was in the garden that was forbidden to eat because it is associated with the law. And the first law given was given to Adam by God, do not eat of the fruit of the tree. But to me, this represents the extraordinary gracious nature of God. Because how, assuming that that was the pomegranate, which I believe that it would have been, because again, that's intertwined with the law, the temple. It got everything to do with that. And it's the number of seeds in that matches the number of laws that was given to Israel. So there's every reason to suspect that that's what the fruit that they ate was. It was related to the knowledge of good and evil, which is specifically what the law is. You don't know things are evil unless you're told not to do them, and you learn about evil through the expression of evil. They became, in the garden, Adam and Eve became aware of evil through the exercise of evil. Their eyes were opened to the existence of evil by actually committing something that was evil, by going against God's law. So that's what the pomegranate represents, is the introduction of the law. And who gave the law? God, for the purpose of following it. The first one given in the garden, all based on following God's law or not. And what was it? It was tied to the eating of a fruit. So I believe wholeheartedly that it was a pomegranate. And when you look at this, always expect God to be the most gracious possible. In any aspect where you question how God would act, expect him to be the most gracious possible up until the point where he can no longer be, because he said, this is what's going to happen if you do that. So he always gives people the most opportunity to turn back. He makes things difficult. But if people are really committed to doing what they're going to do, they're going to find a way around it and they're going to do what they want. But everything about God is grace. Everything about God is giving man the most opportunity until there exists a point where he can no longer give that opportunity. So when you think about this, think about the gracious nature of God in making it difficult for Adam and Eve to break his law. When you think of the different fruits that exist, how easy would it have been to just pluck an apple off the tree and eat it? You don't even have to peel it. You just take it off the tree and eat it. The pomegranate is like one of the most difficult fruits to eat. Not only would she have had to decide that she wanted to go against what she was told, she would have had to have worked at getting the fruit open to actually eat it. She was committed. She was committed to her cause of disobedience. So Adam told her, don't even touch it. And God said, don't eat it. When you think about the pomegranate and you think about the fruit, that was, assuming that that's correct, which again, I believe personally that it was. Think about how difficult it would have been and how committed to her action of disobedience she would have had to have been in order to get to that and eat it, to disobey God. This wasn't a, oops, I like I held it up to my mouth and my teeth accidentally bit it type situation, like with an apple or a pear or a peach or something like that, something simple. There was no mistaking this. There was intent behind her action. There was a commitment to disobedience that existed there. And the pomegranate would have been evidence of that because of how difficult it would have been to get to the fruit to actually eat it. And so this to me is interesting. And really, when you think about the gracious nature of God, this is just more evidence that from the very beginning, he makes it difficult for people to do the wrong thing. You have to make a choice. You have to be committed to doing it. And Eve, assuming that the pomegranate is correct, would have had to have been both of those things in order to disobey. He didn't make it easy. He didn't make it easy, and he wouldn't make it easy. So anyway, I just thought that was interesting. So talk about the fig tree, we talked about the pomegranate. So the pomegranate is associated with the temple, which is associated with the law. There are 613 commandments, there are 613 seeds. And when you go back to the garden, what fruit would have been one of the most difficult to get into, to actually break God's law? That. It would have required dedication and commitment and a knowledge of disobedience. Purposeful, willful. She was. Adam knew exactly what he was doing when he ate too. His reasoning was different from her. She was deceived, but she still had to be committed to her purpose in order to do that. He was committed to her, and that's why he did it. Anyway, Dorothy. Well, where did I find this information that Adam told Eve not to touch the forbidden fruit? Well, you read Genesis 2, and God's command to Adam was, let's read. This goes to marriage covenants, the aspects of love and submission. Eve did not exist when the command was given by God to Adam. Eve existed after the command was given by God to Adam. Thus, the way that she would have found was not directly by God. It would have been by her husband, to whom required submission, as is required of a marriage covenant. Genesis 2, verse 15. The Lord God took the man, put him in the Garden of Eden to dress it and keep it. The Lord God commanded the man, saying, of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat, but of the tree of knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it, for in the day that thou eatest thereof thou shalt surely die. Further in the chapter, he makes Eve out of Adam's rib. Come to Genesis 3. When Eve is talking to the serpent, what does she say? Verse 2, the woman said unto the serpent, we may eat the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die. God did not say, do not touch it. God said, don't eat it. Eve said, we aren't to touch it, or to eat, or we aren't to eat it, or to touch it. Who told her not to touch it? Her husband. That's the inference there. And that goes back to the understanding of marriage covenants, which I wrote all about in the second half of my book entitled In the Beginning, in the Spotlight, Volume 3, In the Beginning, which goes through Genesis 1 through 3. So have a good evening, you guys. I am off to, at 8 o'clock at night on a Saturday, go grocery shopping, because that's what apparently is the thing to do. It's something to do. But if you have any questions, comments, or feedback, as always, please let me know. You guys have a terrific evening. Take care.